I used to think office buildings had a smell. Not coffee, not printer toner, something older. A mixture of ambition and fear that seeped into the carpet and never really left. The kind of place where people learned to laugh quietly and keep their heads down, where compliments came with strings and silence meant survival. The first time I walked into Glasswater & Co., my heels clicked like I belonged. I'd practiced that sound in my apartment hallway the night before, 1, 2, 3, like a metronome for confidence. I'd pinned my hair back, smoothed my blouse, and told myself the same thing 3 times in the mirror. You earned this. You deserve this. Don't let them make you small. I didn't know then how the building would try, or how I would eventually stop it. My name is Mara Ellison, and this is the story of the day I was fired for someone else's daughter, and the months I spent making sure my boss learned what regret tastes like. On the surface, Glasswater was the kind of consulting firm that sold clarity to companies with too much money and too little sense. We created decks that turned chaos into color-coded certainty. We measured success in slides, in metrics, in polished language that made hard decisions sound like natural evolution. Internally, we measured success in something else: proximity to power. And at Glasswater, power wore a tailored blazer and a controlled smile. Power had a name: Julian Voss. If you looked at him quickly, you might think he was handsome in the way magazines define it: sharp jaw, neat hair, eyes that seemed perpetually amused. If you looked longer, you noticed what everyone eventually noticed. Julian didn't just like being in charge. He liked proving it. The first time he spoke to me directly was in a Monday morning meeting, 12 of us squeezed into a conference room named after a river. The walls were glass, as if transparency could be trademarked. Julian sat at the head of the table with his laptop open, and his hands folded like he was about to perform a magic trick. He looked around the room and said, "I need someone to lead the Hastings account turnaround. Fast, clean, no excuses." His gaze moved like a spotlight, landing on faces and sliding away. When it reached me, it paused. "Mara," he said like he'd rehearsed my name, "you've been consistent." It wasn't a compliment, not really. At Glasswater, consistent meant obedient, dependable, useful. I met his eyes anyway. "I can do it." Julian's smile tightened a fraction. "Can you?" There was a soft laugh from someone to my left, Nina, one of the senior associates who collected promotions like jewelry. I ignored it. "Yes," I said. "I can." Julian studied me for a moment, then closed his laptop with a soft click that felt like a gavel. "Good," he said. "Then you will." That account made my reputation. It also became the first brick in the road that led to my downfall. I worked late nights in quiet rooms where the only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the distant cleaning crew. I ate dinner from vending machines. I slept with my phone on my pillow. I learned how to predict Julian's moods by the cadence of his footsteps. He liked results, yes, but more than that, he liked control. He didn't praise, he evaluated. He didn't mentor. He sharpened people until they cut. Still, I rose. By my 3rd year, my calendar was a battlefield. My inbox was a flood. My salary finally matched the hours I gave away. My name started appearing on the high potential list. And at home, my daughter, Leela, turned 7. Leela was the reason I woke up. She was the reason I kept showing up to a building that tried to reduce me to a function. She was the reason I stayed polite when Julian interrupted me in meetings, the reason I swallowed anger when Nina took credit for my work. Because every time I walked through the front door of my apartment at night, Leela would be there in her pajamas, hair a halo of tangles, holding a book and trying not to fall asleep. "Mom," she'd whisper, like it was a secret I'd returned. "You're home." And I would sit beside her and read the same story 3 times if she asked, because her voice made everything else feel less permanent. Then one Thursday in October, Leela's school called me at 2:17 p.m. Her teacher's voice was careful. Too careful. "Mara," she said, "Leela has a fever. She's very uncomfortable. We can't keep her here." I stared at my screen, at the spreadsheet I'd been building for the Voss-led quarterly review. Julian wanted it by 5. Julian always wanted everything by 5. "I'm in the middle of something," I said automatically because I'd been trained to talk that way. Can I call you back in 10? Mara, the teacher repeated, gentler now. She's asking for you. I closed my eyes. In my mind, I saw Leela on the little cot in the nurse's office. Her cheeks flushed, her lips dry, her eyes searching the door every time footsteps passed. I'm coming, I said, my voice breaking slightly. I'm coming right now. I stood up before I could talk myself out of it. I grabbed my bag, my phone, my coat, and I walked straight into Julian Voss's office. His door was open, of course. He liked people to see him working. He liked visibility. Julian looked up as I entered, eyebrows lifting like I'd inconvenienced him by existing. Mara, he said, if you're here about the Q4 review, my daughter is sick, I said. Her school called. I need to pick her up. Julian blinked once. Then he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. The review, he said, is today. I know, I said. I've done most of it. I can finish from home tonight. But I need to leave now. Julian's eyes flickered toward the clock on his wall, like time itself was his employee. You know, he said slowly, this is what I mean when I say certain people aren't built for leadership. The words slid under my skin like something sharp. I kept my voice steady. My daughter has a fever. Julian's mouth twitched, almost like a smile. And I have a board presentation, he said. Everyone has obligations, Mara. The question is which ones you prioritize. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The audacity of it stole language from me. I thought of Leela. I thought of the nurse's office. I thought of all the nights I'd missed bedtime so Julian could have a clean deck. I'm leaving, I said. I'm not asking, I'm informing you. Julian's eyes narrowed. That, he said quietly, is an interesting tone. My heart hammered. I wanted to slam the door. I wanted to scream. Instead, I turned to go because Leela mattered more than my pride. Julian's voice followed me. If you walk out right now, he said, don't bother walking back in. I stopped in the doorway. In my head, 1,000 calculations raced. Mortgage, health insurance, daycare, grocery bills, the soft, terrible math of single motherhood. I turned back to him. Julian, I said, trying one last time, I will make up the hours. I will finish the work, but my child is... Julian cut me off with a dismissive lift of his hand. Go, he said. Take care of your priorities. He said it like a verdict. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, waiting for the moment he'd soften, or pretend he was testing me, or reveal there was some hidden allowance in his cruelty. But Julian just looked at me like I was already gone. So I left. I drove to Leela's school with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I picked her up, carried her to the car, held her little head against my shoulder while she whimpered. At home, I tucked her into bed and pressed a cool cloth to her forehead. And at 5:03 p.m., my phone buzzed. An email from HR. Subject line, employment termination effective immediately. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might vomit. I opened it with one hand while the other stayed on Leela's hair. The words were formal, neat, almost elegant in their coldness. Due to performance and failure to meet role expectations, effective immediately, final paycheck details, return of company property. I read it 3 times, like repetition would change the outcome. Then my eyes moved to the bottom. Manager, Julian Voss. I didn't cry, not then. I sat very still beside my daughter's bed, listening to her breathing, and something inside me shifted. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was clarity. Julian Voss had just shown me who he was, and I believed him. And because I believed him, I stopped treating him like a storm I had to endure. Storms are weather. Julian was a person. People can be dismantled. The next morning, Leela's fever broke. She woke up sweaty and confused, asked for pancakes, and insisted she was totally fine. I smiled and made pancakes anyway, because letting her believe she'd defeated the illness felt like a tiny victory in a house that suddenly felt unstable. While she ate, I opened my laptop. My company laptop was still on the dining table where I'd dropped it the day before. Technically, it was Glasswater property. Technically, I was supposed to return it immediately. Technically, Julian had already taken my income away. I stared at the login screen for a long time. Then I typed in my password. It worked. I wasn't surprised. Glasswater was obsessed with control, but they were also sloppy in the way powerful places often are, assuming no one would dare bite them. I didn't intend to steal files. I didn't download proprietary data. I wasn't interested in being a headline or a cautionary tale. What I wanted was simpler. I wanted to understand, so I opened my email. My access hadn't been revoked yet, either. The inbox was full of chaos. Messages from clients, from colleagues, from Julian's executive assistant asking about the board packet. And then, in my calendar, a meeting invite for 9:30 am Q4 review. Final run. Julian would be in the boardroom at that moment, probably furious, probably confident he could patch the hole I'd left by throwing Nina at it. I imagined him pacing, voice clipped, demanding answers. And for a moment, that image warmed me. Then I saw a message thread labeled, Internship Candidate Personal Referral. Curiosity pulled me. I clicked. The email was from Julian to HR, sent 2 weeks earlier. He was pushing through a candidate named Sloan Voss. Same last name, not a coincidence. Julian wrote, Sloan is exceptionally driven. She needs an internship placement as part of her program. This is important. Please expedite. HR responded politely. We can accommodate, though the candidate does not meet the standard criteria, Julian replied. Make it work. I scrolled further. Sloan's resume was attached. It was fine, polished, basic, heavy on buzzwords, light on substance. In another email, Julian wrote, She's my daughter. This stays discreet. I leaned back in my chair. There it was, the missing piece. Julian hadn't fired me because I missed a deadline. He'd fired me because I demonstrated that I would choose my daughter over his demands, and Julian couldn't tolerate people who chose anything over him. But the irony was sharp enough to cut. Julian had just twisted the entire company's processes for his own daughter. He could bend rules for her future, but my daughter's fever was an unforgivable inconvenience. I closed my eyes, breathing slowly. This wasn't just personal cruelty, it was hypocrisy wearing a suit. And hypocrisy, I learned, is fragile. I forwarded the email thread to my personal email address. Not to leak it. Not to post it. To keep it. Evidence has a weight. It steadies your hand when people try to rewrite reality. Then I logged off. I spent the rest of the day taking care of Leela and making phone calls, health insurance, unemployment, budgeting. That night after Leela fell asleep, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and wrote 3 columns. What I need. What Julian fears. What I know. What I needed was obvious. Income, stability, time. What Julian feared took longer. Men like him feared loss of authority, public embarrassment, exposure of hypocrisy. They feared being seen as small. And what I knew the firm's processes. I knew where the bodies were buried, not literal bodies, but the paper cuts and corners cut, the shortcuts framed as strategy. I knew Julian's patterns, his habits, his pressure points. I knew something else, too. Julian Voss never regretted being cruel. He regretted being caught. So I made a plan that didn't require catching him doing something new. I would simply shine a light on what he'd already done. Glasswater's contracts included a clause that made poaching difficult. Leaving employees were forbidden to solicit clients for a year. But the clause had a loophole. One of those strategic loopholes the firm used to pretend it was ethical while still being predatory. If a client approached you first, you could accept. Glasswater loved plausible deniability. I loved it more. 2 weeks after my termination, I got coffee with a former client contact, Maribel Tan, operations director at a mid-sized company I'd worked with. She reached out to me, not the other way around. Her email had been short. Heard you're no longer at Glasswater. That's surprising. Want to catch up? We met at a cafe with mismatched chairs and the smell of cinnamon. Maribel didn't waste time. Julian called me, she said, stirring her coffee with unnecessary violence. He wanted to resell the turnaround framework you built. He spoke like you were an interchangeable part. My jaw tightened. That sounds like him. Maribel studied me. What happened? I could have lied. I could have given the corporate answer. I could have made it vague. Instead, I told her the truth. My daughter got sick, I said. I left to pick her up. Julian fired me. Maribel's eyebrows shot up. You're joking. I shook my head. Maribel leaned back, exhaling sharply. That's disgusting. Her anger was immediate, protective, and it startled me. I'd been carrying the story like a shameful secret, and she treated it like what it was, an outrage. I'm sorry, she said, softer now. Are you okay? I smiled, but it felt brittle. I will be. Maribel tapped her fingernail against her cup. We're ending our contract with Glasswater next quarter, she said. Not because of you, because they're overpriced and underdeliver. My heart kicked. And, she continued, I've been thinking, what if we didn't replace them with another firm? What if we hired you? The word you hung in the air like possibility. I felt my throat tighten. I'm bound by a non-solicit, I said carefully. Maribel waved a hand. We approached you. I looked at her, really looked. She was offering me something Julian had taken, agency. I can't promise miracles, I said slowly, but I can promise honesty and results. Maribel smiled. That's all we ever wanted. We talked for an hour, then 2. By the time we stood to leave, my hands weren't shaking anymore. I had my first client as an independent consultant. That night, I opened my notebook again. What I needed. Income, stability, time. 1 box checked. But Julian wasn't done with me. I knew that because 2 days later, Nina called. She'd never called me outside of work before. Her voice was syrupy. Mara, hi. Long time. I stared at my phone like it was an insect. What do you want? Nina laughed lightly. Straight to the point, I respect that. I didn't respond. Nina continued. Julian wants to know where you're working. He's concerned you might be violating agreements. Concerned? I repeated flatly. Look, Nina said, her tone shifting into something sharper. You don't want to mess with Glasswater. They can bury you. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Tell Julian, I said, to stop using you as a messenger. Nina's silence was a tiny crack. I'm not afraid, I added, and I'm not stupid. If he wants to speak to me, he can do it himself. In writing. I hung up. For a moment, my hands trembled. Then I forced myself to breathe. Fear was a familiar reflex, but I wasn't going to let it become my master again. Julian's pressure tactics confirmed something important. He was watching me. Good. Let him. Because my plan wasn't just to survive. It was to make sure Julian never treated another woman like I was disposable. Not by preaching. Not by begging. By applying pressure where it mattered. His reputation. His board. His shiny, fragile image. In December, Glasswater hosted its annual Vision Night. A glossy internal event where leadership gave speeches about culture and values while employees ate dry chicken and smiled too hard. I wasn't invited, obviously, but I didn't need an invitation because I still had friends inside. One of them was Callum Price, an analyst with a kind face and tired eyes. We'd worked late nights together. He'd seen me carry teams. He'd also seen Julian cut people down like it entertained him. Callum met me after work at a quiet bar where the music was low enough to talk. I shouldn't be here, he said, glancing around like someone might report him. You're not doing anything wrong, I said. We're having a drink. Callum gave a strained smile. At Glasswater, everything is wrong if Julian decides it is. I nodded. How's the firm? Callum hesitated, then leaned in. It's tense, he admitted. Your firing shook people, even the ones who pretended it didn't. My pulse quickened. What do you mean? Callum swallowed. Everyone knows why you were fired, not officially. But you know how gossip works. I did. And Julian's daughter started, Callum continued. Sloane, internship, she's loud. Loud, I could picture it, entitlement with a fresh manicure. Callum added, Julian's been protecting her, putting her on high-profile work she can't handle, forcing people to fix her mistakes. My lips pressed together. How are they responding? Callum's eyes flicked away. They're resentful, but no one speaks up. Because they're afraid, I said. Callum nodded miserably. I took a slow sip of my drink, thinking. Callum, I said, do you remember the client satisfaction survey process? His brow furrowed. Yes, Glasswater sent anonymous surveys after major engagements. The results went to leadership and the board. They were supposed to be confidential, supposed to be. What about it? Callum asked. I leaned forward. I want to know if Julian has been curating the results. Callum's eyes widened. I'm not asking you to steal data, I said quickly. I'm asking you to tell me if you've seen anything, heard anything. Is there manipulation? Callum's jaw tightened. He does it, he said quietly. Everyone knows. He filters negative comments, he reframes them, he calls it context. A thin smile pulled at my mouth. Fragile hypocrisy. There's a board committee, Callum continued, voice shaking slightly. They're supposed to oversee quality, but Julian controls what they see. I nodded slowly. And Vision Night, I said, is coming up. Callum frowned. So, I said, Vision Night is when the board members show up, right? Some of them. Callum nodded. And Julian gives his speech about values, I said. About family, probably. Callum's expression tightened. He always mentions supporting working parents. I felt a cold laugh rise in my chest. Callum, I said softly, I'm going to ask you to do something small. He stiffened. Mara, listen, I said. I'm not asking you to risk your job. I'm asking you to do something that protects people in the long run. Callum's eyes held mine. He looked tired. He looked angry. He looked like someone who wanted to stop feeling powerless. What? He asked. I slid my phone across the table, showing him a draft email. It wasn't addressed to employees. It was addressed to the board committee. In it, I wrote, I am a former senior consultant at Glasswater & Co. I was terminated after leaving to care for my ill child. I am writing because I believe there are serious issues in how client feedback is handled and presented to the board. I am available to provide details, including documentation. Callum's throat bobbed. You're going to email the board? Yes, I said. That's nuclear, he whispered. It's accountability, I corrected. Callum looked down at the email again. Documentation? I tapped the screen. I have proof of Julian bypassing HR processes for his daughter, and I have a record of my termination timeline. I also have witnesses. Callum's face tightened. Witnesses. Like me, only if you choose, I said. You can stay anonymous, but you can help me get the email to the right person. Callum's fingers trembled slightly as he slid the phone back. I can't, he said, and I saw real fear in him. Then he exhaled, long and shaky. I mean, he corrected, I can't do nothing anymore. He pulled out his own phone. The committee chair, he said. Her name is Annika Rowe. She's not a Julian fan. My pulse quickened again. Callum typed, then he looked up. If I send this, he said, I'm crossing a line. I leaned in, voice low. Julian crossed it first, over and over. He crossed it when he fired me for taking care of my child. He crossed it every time he punished someone for being human. Callum stared at his screen, then nodded once, small, resolute. I'll forward it, he said. And just like that, my plan moved from notebook fantasy to reality. The reply came 3 days later. It arrived in my personal inbox at 7:12 a.m. on a Tuesday. Subject: Ray, concerns regarding feedback handling and employment practices. My hands went cold. I opened it. Annika Rowe's message was professional, brief, but not dismissive. Miss Ellison, thank you for bringing this to my attention. I would like to speak with you directly. Are you available this week for a confidential conversation? Annika Rowe, I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling something like vindication and something like dread. Because once you start pulling on a thread, you don't get to choose what unravels. I replied yes. We scheduled a call. When Annika's number flashed on my phone, I answered in a voice that didn't betray how hard my heart was pounding. Miss Ellison, Annika said. Her voice was calm, precise. Thank you for taking this call. Thank you for hearing me, I said. Annika didn't waste time. Tell me what happened. So I did. I told her about the school call, the deadline, Julian's threat, the termination email, the hypocrisy of him pushing his daughter through hiring back channels. Annika listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a brief pause. That's concerning, she said finally. And the feedback manipulation? I don't have the raw survey data, I admitted. But multiple employees can corroborate the practice. I also suspect there are internal emails. Annika hummed thoughtfully. Glasswater has a duty to present accurate reporting to the board, she said. If Julian is altering feedback, that's a governance issue. Yes, I said. And your termination, she added, raises legal and ethical concerns. I swallowed. I'm not looking for a payout, I said. I'm looking for change. There was another pause, and then Annika's voice softened slightly. Sometimes, she said, change requires consequences. I closed my eyes. What happens now? I asked. Annika's tone returned to professional calm. The committee will review this. Quietly, we may initiate an independent audit of client feedback processes. We may also request HR documentation related to your termination. My mouth went dry. Julian will know. He may suspect, Annika said, but we won't reveal our source. I almost laughed. Julian didn't need sources. He had instincts for threats. Miss Ellison, Annika added, if we find merit, there will be action. My fingers curled against my palm. Thank you, I said. After the call, I sat at my kitchen table staring at nothing. Leela padded into the kitchen in her socks, hair messy, eyes sleepy. Mom, she asked, why do you look weird? I smiled and pulled her onto my lap. Just thinking, I said, kissing her forehead. Thinking about pancakes? She asked hopefully. I laughed, real laughter, surprising and bright. Sure, I said, thinking about pancakes. But later, when Leela was at school and the apartment was quiet, the fear came. Because I knew Julian Voss. He wasn't the kind of man who accepted consequences gracefully. He was the kind who struck back, and 2 days later he did. I received a letter from Glasswater's legal counsel. Cease and desist. Non-disparagement. Threat of legal action for interference. It was written in the polite language of intimidation, the kind that assumes you'll fold because the paper looks official. I read it, then set it down. My hands shook slightly, but my mind was clear. Julian didn't know what evidence I had. He didn't know about Annika. He was throwing punches in the dark, which meant my light was working. I called Marable. I called a lawyer. I did everything carefully, quietly, correctly. And then I waited for the next crack. It came from an unexpected place. Sloan Voss messaged me on a professional networking site. Her profile picture was perfect, smooth hair, bright smile, eyes that looked like they'd never cried. Her headline read, Future Leader Strategic Thinker Change Maker. The message was short. Hi, Mara. I found your name connected to some documents at the office. Are you the one trying to ruin my dad? I stared at the screen, feeling a strange mix of amusement and disgust. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't ask why. She didn't ask if I was okay. She went straight to ruin. I typed a response, then deleted it. I tried again. Then I stopped. Sloan wasn't my target. She was a symptom, a reflection of Julian's entitlement, polished and inherited. Still, her message was useful, because it confirmed Julian was rattled enough that his daughter was sniffing around. So I replied with something simple and true. Sloan, I'm not trying to ruin anyone. I'm trying to tell the truth about my own experience. I hope you never find yourself punished for caring about someone you love. Mara, she didn't respond. But a week later, Callum texted me 3 words, audit is happening. My breath caught. Then another text, Julian is furious. I could picture him in his office, jaw tight, smile gone, fingers tapping like a metronome of anger. The board committee had initiated an independent review of client feedback procedures. Officially, it was routine. Unofficially, it was a spotlight. Julian hated spotlights he didn't control. Over the next month, small things started shifting inside Glasswater, like the building itself was adjusting. Employees were asked to submit feedback directly to auditors. Survey data was pulled from systems Julian couldn't edit. HR files were reviewed. Julian started holding more meetings, more alignment sessions, more speeches about culture, like talking could patch the cracks. And then, in January, Annika emailed me again. Miss Ellison, we have identified inconsistencies in reported client feedback compared to raw submissions. We have also reviewed your termination file and found procedural irregularities. We will be taking next steps. Annika Rowe, I read the email twice, then stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the city moved on. Cars, people, winter air. Inside, my heart pounded with something that wasn't fear anymore. It was anticipation. I didn't know exactly what next steps meant, but I knew Julian was nearing the edge of something. And when he realized he couldn't intimidate the board, he did what men like him always do. He tried to find a scapegoat. Callum called me that night, voice shaking. "He's blaming me," Callum said. "He pulled me into his office. He asked if I'd been talking to you." My stomach dropped. "What did you say?" "I said no," Callum whispered. "But he doesn't believe me. He said he's going to restructure my role." Restructure, the corporate word for punishment. I closed my eyes, anger surging. "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't mean for you to." "Mara," Callum interrupted, voice sharper now. "Don't apologize. He's done this to everyone. He just didn't expect anyone to push back." My throat tightened. "What are you going to do?" Callum exhaled. "I'm going to give the auditors my full statement," he said. "If he's coming for me anyway, I might as well make it worth it." My skin prickled. "Callum," I said, "that's dangerous." "I know," he said, "but I'm done being scared." When the call ended, I sat down hard on my couch. This was the part of revenge stories no one talks about, the collateral fear, the weight of other people's risks. I didn't want anyone hurt for my sake. But I also knew something. Julian had been hurting people quietly for years, and the quiet was the shield that protected him. Callum's courage wasn't collateral. It was a crack in the dam. And cracks become floods. The day Julian Voss fell wasn't dramatic in the way movies promise. There were no shouting matches in the lobby. No security escort. No public scandal splashed across headlines. Power doesn't always collapse with noise. Sometimes it collapses with paperwork. It happened on a Thursday in February. I was at Maribel's office, presenting a streamlined plan for her next quarter. I'd brought my own deck, clean, honest, built for function instead of ego. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. I excused myself, stepped into the hallway, and answered. "Mara Ellison?" a voice asked. "Yes, this is Annika Rowe," the voice said. My heart stuttered. "I wanted you to hear this directly," Annika said. "The board has voted to remove Julian Voss from his position effective immediately." For a second, the hallway tilted. I pressed my hand against the wall. "Removed?" I echoed. "Yes," Annika confirmed. "The audit found significant manipulation of client feedback reporting over multiple quarters. There were also substantiated complaints regarding management practices, including retaliatory terminations." My mouth went dry. "And my termination?" I asked. Annika's voice softened slightly. "It was flagged as wrongful in process and intent. HR leadership will be reviewed as well." I swallowed hard. "What happens to Julian?" Annika's pause was brief but telling. "He will not be offered a soft landing," she said. "He wanted control. He will not keep it." A strange sensation rose in me, something between relief and grief. Because even though I'd wanted him to fall, part of me had lived under his shadow for so long that the absence felt unreal. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you," Annika replied. "For speaking, most people don't." When the call ended, I stood in the hallway staring at the floor. My hands were shaking, not from fear this time, from release. I went back into the conference room and finished my presentation. Maribel asked a question, and I answered it like a professional, like nothing had changed. But when I got into my car afterward, I sat behind the wheel and let myself breathe. Then I laughed, once then again until tears blurred my vision. Not because Julian was gone, because I wasn't powerless anymore. Julian reached out to me 2 weeks later, not through Nina, not through legal counsel, directly. His email subject line read, "Request for conversation." The message was short. "Mara, I would like to meet and speak. I owe you that. Please let me know when you're available." "Julian," I stared at it, feeling my stomach tighten. "Owe you that?" As if a conversation was a currency that could repay what he'd taken. I didn't want to meet him. The thought of sitting across from him made my skin crawl. But I also knew something. Julian didn't ask for things unless he needed them. And curiosity is a kind of leverage. So I agreed on my terms. We met in a public place. A quiet cafe with big windows and too many people for him to pull anything. I arrived first. I chose a table near the window. I ordered tea. When Julian walked in, I barely recognized him. He still wore a suit, but it looked like armor that didn't fit anymore. His posture was rigid. His eyes darted around the room like he expected someone to witness him being diminished. When he spotted me, his expression tightened. He approached, sat down without asking, and folded his hands like he was trying to hold himself together. "Mara," he said. "Julian," I replied. Silence stretched. Julian cleared his throat. "You look well," he said, as if that was a polite opener. "I'm working," I said. "I'm taking care of my daughter." A flicker crossed his face, something like discomfort. He looked down at his hands, then back up. "I didn't handle that day properly," he said. I blinked slowly. "No," I agreed. "You didn't." Julian's jaw tightened. "You have to understand," I held up a hand. "No," I said calmly. "I don't." His eyes flashed. Then he exhaled, shoulders dropping slightly. "They made it sound," he said, voice lower, "like I'm a monster." I stared at him. Julian's eyes were glossy, but not with tears, more like rage held underwater. "They took everything," he continued. "My position, my reputation, your control," I said. He flinched just slightly. Julian swallowed. "Sloane," he said abruptly. "My daughter, she's devastated. She thinks this is her fault." The audacity of it made my chest tighten. He brought his daughter into this as a shield, the way he always did. I leaned forward slightly, my voice quiet but firm. "Julian," I said, "you fired me for leaving to pick up my sick child." Julian's lips pressed together. "You did that," I continued. "Not the board, not me. You." His eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw something I'd never seen in him before. Not empathy, not remorse, fear. He was afraid of being remembered accurately. "I didn't think it would," he started. "Matter," I finished. Julian's mouth tightened. I sat back, sipping my tea. I let the silence stretch until it forced him to sit inside it. Finally, Julian spoke again, voice quieter. "I'm sorry," he said. The words landed like a pebble tossed into a canyon, small, lost. I watched him carefully. "What do you want?" I asked. Julian's eyes flickered. "A statement," he admitted. Something that says we resolved this. Something that helps me move forward." There it was. Not remorse, damage control. I felt my pulse steady. I'd imagined this moment 100 times, Julian asking for mercy, for softness, for the kind of grace he never gave. And I realized something else. Revenge wasn't the moment he fell. Revenge was the moment I got to decide what happened next. I set my tea down. "No," I said. Julian's eyes widened slightly. "No," he echoed, like the concept was foreign. "I'm not giving you a statement," I said. "I'm not polishing your story. You can move forward with the truth." Julian's face hardened. "You realize," he said, voice sharpening, "that you've made enemies." I smiled faintly. "Julian," I said, "you fired me, you threatened me, your lawyers threatened me, you already made yourself my enemy." His nostrils flared. Then he leaned forward, voice low and tense. "What do you want?" he demanded. I met his gaze, steady. "I wanted you to stop," I said. "To stop treating people like tools, to stop punishing them for having lives, to stop making the world smaller for everyone who isn't you." Julian scoffed, but it sounded weak. "And did I get that?" I continued. "I don't know, but I got something else." Julian's eyes narrowed. "What?" I tilted my head slightly. "I got free," I said. For a moment, Julian looked like he might speak, like he might lash out. Then he slumped back in his chair, the fight draining from him in a way that felt almost pathetic. He stared at the table. "I built everything," he murmured, not quite to me. I stood. "You built a cage," I said, "and you thought you were the only one with the key." Julian didn't look up. I turned and walked out of the cafe, my heartbeat steady, my hands calm. Outside, the winter air bit my cheeks. I inhaled deeply, feeling it fill my lungs like a cleansing. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Leela's babysitter. She just finished her homework. "She says she misses you." I smiled. I typed back, "Tell her I'm on my way." In the months that followed, Glasswater changed, not overnight, not perfectly, but visibly. Julian's replacement was a woman named Carmen Hale, someone the board brought in specifically because she'd built her career on repair, not domination. Callum quit and took a job at a company that treated him like a person. We met for coffee once, and he looked lighter, like someone who'd stepped out from under a weight he didn't know he was carrying. Nina stayed. People like Nina always find ways to stay, but her power dimmed without Julian's shadow to amplify it. And me, I built my own consultancy. Marable introduced me to another client, then another. My work was slower, steadier, more honest. I worked during school hours. I picked Leela up on time. Sometimes, when Leela was asleep and my apartment was quiet, I would think of Julian Voss in that cafe, the way his apology sounded like a transaction, the way his fear revealed the fragile thing inside him. I never celebrated his suffering. I didn't need to. I had something better. I had a life where my worth wasn't decided by a man with a tailored blazer and a god complex. One evening in late spring, Leela and I sat on the balcony eating ice cream. The sun was low, turning the buildings gold. "Mom," Leela said, licking chocolate off her spoon, "why don't you go to your old work anymore?" I watched her, small and bright and real. "Because they didn't treat people nicely," I said. Leela frowned, thinking hard. "Did you tell them to stop?" I smiled. "In a way," I said. Leela nodded solemnly, like this was a serious moral equation. "Good," she said. "If someone is mean, you should tell them." I laughed softly. "Yes," I said, "you should." Leela leaned against me, warm and sticky with sugar. "Are you happy now?" she asked. I looked out at the city, at the sky, at the future that didn't feel like a threat anymore. "Yes," I said. "I am." Leela hummed contentedly and went back to her ice cream. And as the light faded, I thought about the smell of office buildings, the ambition and fear, the quiet cruelty hidden under polite language. Then I thought about something else. The smell of home, pancakes in the morning, clean laundry, Leela's hair after a bath. Freedom has a scent too, and once you've breathed it in, you never forget it. Because the truth is, Julian Voss didn't just regret firing me. He regretted teaching me how to fight, and I didn't fight with fists. I fought with clarity, with evidence, with patience, with the kind of quiet persistence that powerful people underestimate until it's too late. That's the thing about people like Julian. They think the world is built on their decisions. They forget the world is built on everyone else tolerating them. Until someone stops. Until someone stands up and walks out the door anyway. And this time doesn't come back. Not because they were defeated. Because they finally realized they never needed permission to leave. And if you're listening to this story wondering what happened to Julian Voss after that cafe, if you're hoping for a dramatic ending, a public downfall, a final humiliation, I'll tell you something quieter. The last time I heard his name, it was attached to a smaller company, a lower title, a role with less shine. No board, no speeches, no empire, just a man doing work without the illusion of being untouchable. And maybe, somewhere along the way, he learned something. Or maybe he didn't. But I did. I learned that revenge doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to be cruel. It just has to be precise. And in the end, the sweetest part wasn't watching Julian lose. It was watching myself win. Not against him. For my daughter. For my life. For the version of me that practiced confident footsteps in a hallway, believing she deserved more. She was right. I did. And now, no one gets to fire me for loving my daughter.